recording this. See, we're recording it. Ask and you get. So without further ado, I want to turn the program over to Justin Dula from the DEP, and he will do a presentation about the new environmental justice policy.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy, and thanks for having me to talk about this policy. I appreciate the time that you are all dedicating to hearing about this. And just in a way to make sure that this is useful, I always like to set out sort of goals for what people should be able to get after the presentation. So I'm going to include some basics about environmental justice, equity, and equality. So folks should have a good concept of some of those terms and the history behind them. You'll get to know about our environmental justice policy revision and how to comment on that. And then also provide some tools both from DEP and from other groups that'll help you identify environmental justice concerns in communities that you live and work with. And so one of the main goals that I'd like to start with for this is just letting everyone know in advance, we're doing a lot of presentations about this policy now. As you have thoughts and questions in this, there's plenty of time for Q&A afterwards, but want to make sure that folks, if you have thoughts on the policy, there's formal ways to comment in writing or at virtual hearings. And I'll talk more about this at the end, but just wanted to lead off with that as well, to just say, as you have comments or thoughts on the policy, we encourage you to read it and submit a formal comment, and those will all get responded to in a comment response document. The Q&A during this session is really more to inform people about the policy and how they can comment on it officially. So I guess I'm Justin Dula. I'm the director of the Office of Environmental Justice at the Department of Environmental Protection, or DEP. I'd like to start out with our mission of protecting Pennsylvania's air, land, and water from pollution. And we do this through a group of deputates or bureaus that work on water, waste, air, and remediation, active and abandoned mines, and oil and gas. And the way that most people interact with DEP is through our regional offices. So depending on where you're located, these are the different offices or regions based on county. And that's really how most people interact with DEP, is through a regional office. And to get into some of the basics about environmental justice and the definitions, I always like to point out that there's there is no one set standard definition that everyone uses for environmental justice. Terms that we use on the government side relate to the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income. And I'll say where those terms come from, but I'll also talk a little bit more about the history. There's a community-based definition that's focused on the 17 principles of environmental justice that come from the First People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. So just want to point out that there's a broad difference in terms depending on who you're talking to of what exactly environmental justice means and what the scope of that is. And other common terms around environmental justice. I think a lot of people may have seen portions of a graphic like this before that explain equality, equity, and justice and help visualize the terms. But I like this one because it really shows there's the goal of, in this case, of watching the baseball game, and the goal of DEP. It's achieving that mission of a clean environment for folks. But people are coming from different areas, different basis of history, which is shown by the sloped ground, and they're also facing new and different barriers that are often caused by issues like systemic racism that still exist, as we'll talk about, and that's shown by the fence. So equality gives everyone the same resources or boxes, but that in that case, not everyone is still able to achieve the goal. Equity gives everyone the resources they need to be able to achieve the goal, but justice really works to take down some of those barriers so that people are able to achieve the goal with fewer resources in the future. And that's really the goal of all justice movements. And when we talk about some of those historic issues that people are facing in relation to that sloped ground, one of the most visible examples of that is redlining. And redlining was a practice in the lending market, and it was government enforced and encouraged, where it really was identifying areas where people should invest and where people shouldn't invest, and they drew a red line around those areas that were considered hazardous, which is where the term redlining comes from. And those redlining maps often explicitly used race and class as a reason to not invest in those communities. And so that's a very obvious and visible example of historical inequities, but a very visible one. But it's just one example of many types of inequities that were happening and have happened. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 really worked to try to overcome or outlaw certain elements related to that, particularly around race, color, and national origin are called out. And that's where a lot of the federal definitions of environmental justice come from. And they rely on the Civil Rights Act as legal enforcement around environmental justice laws. And there are other additional non-discrimination laws that are pointed out that give some support to that. But simultaneously, there was the environmental movement and increasing environmental awareness in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but we didn't always see it being equally applied to all communities. And so these are some key historic points in the environmental justice movement. In Warren County, North Carolina, the setting of a landfill in predominantly African-American neighborhood was a genesis of a lot of protest and the term environmental racism. And this helped lead to the United Church of Christ study, which quantified the location of waste disposal and polluting industrial facilities being in communities of color. And sort of scientifically looking at this across the country. And this led to the first People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit in 1991, where the 17 principles of environmental justice were agreed upon. And then President Clinton in 1994 signed an executive order stating that each federal agency shall make achieving environmental justice part of its mission. And that executive order is still in effect today and has been expanded on by President Biden. In Pennsylvania, the roots of environmental justice relate to organizing around the city of Chester, which had multiple waste facilities. And the state and EPA worked to do studies with the community to help identify risk. But Chester residents concerned for quality living filed a lawsuit against the DEP in 1996, claiming a discriminatory effect under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, because the community was about 70% African American and had a vast majority of, it contained about 8% of the county's population, but had 60% of the Delaware County's waste facilities. So that lawsuit led DEP to create an environmental justice working group in 1999 that led to a report and recommendations and the creation of an environmental justice policy that's been in effect since 2004, which is the policy that we're updating with this current update. So this is just a timeline to put some of those national highlights and compare them with things that have happened in Pennsylvania. So the blue items are some key points in Pennsylvania, and the others are items that are happening nationally. And just you see the movement from identifying environmental justice to moving in the late 90s and early 2000s through to public participation, and you get increasing legislative action to try to move towards sort of stopping issues around environmental justice from existing in the first place. But some more recent items to call out are the President Biden's executive order 14008, which has the Justice 40 initiative on that, stating that 40% of investments should benefit distressed communities. And then also Governor Wolf signed an executive order in October of 2021 on environmental justice that adds an additional layer of support to strengthen DEP's environmental justice policy and brings it to other executive level agencies in Pennsylvania. When we talk about, it's important to know that this is all based in science around disproportionate impacts that communities are facing. So there's three drivers: built environment, natural environment, and social environment. And these concerns sort of come together and multiply with environmental injustice, so that communities are facing multiple different negative effects on their residents. Our goal at the Department of Environmental Protection in the Office of Environmental Justice is to do what we can within our regulatory ability to minimize adverse environmental impacts, empower communities, and foster economic opportunities for communities facing environmental justice issues. So now I'm going to shift over and talk about our current policy and our updated policy revision. So our current policy has been in effect since 2004. It focuses on public participation in the permitting process, specifically around specific, in that policy, environmental justice communities where the policy is in effect are focused on areas where 30% or more of a census tract are people of color and 20% or more people live below the poverty line. And it identifies some particular permits that are a focus of community concern, typically around waste facilities, air facilities, other facilities that are of concern. And it only encourages public participation in the process of siting those facilities. So we had worked to update the policy and heard a lot of feedback during the public comment period that just updating and tweaking that public participation policy was not enough. So we withdrew the draft. We had done that in 2017 and 2018. And really started a process of extensive outreach, building on the comments we heard during that public comment period on trying to include other factors that we can do within our regulatory authority to help further our environmental justice goals. And that is a point to bring out, that we are a regulatory agency at DEP, and we can only work on statutes and regulations that are passed by the legislature. So there's only so much leniency we have in enforcing, we can't do whatever we want, I guess. It has to be based in law. So, but we wanted to try to include more meaningful involvement and see what we could do that would go beyond beyond the permitting process. So we've had extensive feedback from communities in helping to draft this, and the policy that we have that's up for comment right now is based around 8 sections. I'll just touch on them each briefly so you get an idea of what is in each section and what improvements we've made since the 2004 policy. So we added a robust definition section to help people understand key terms and ensure that the agency is using them consistently, and help clarify the document and increase readability of the policy overall. This general information section, in addition to the definitions, also calls out work that's done by the Office of Environmental Justice that goes beyond the permitting process. A lot of this work was already being done, but we wanted to get it down in writing so that it would continue to be done through different administrations. And then also, it also referred to our Environmental Justice Advisory Board, which is a group that was in existence before and helps guide DEP. But we wanted to call out the existence of that group in the policy and lay out how they're organized a little bit better in the policy. The second section builds from the current policy with updates and improvements. We did hear that, people do want us to look at permitting. They just want us to do more. So we tried to clarify which permits were covered in the policy a little bit more clearly and more updated, because some of the different permits types have changed since 2004. And the policy does allow for Bureau staff to opt in other types of permits. So we called out some specific permits where we thought staff should look at opting in. It might not be appropriate in every case to enforce the public participation policy, but wanted to call out some specific ones where that might be useful. And then Section 3 describes the community input process in that public participation trigger permit policy, and identifies some outreach options that can be used. Section 4 talks about a policy around oil and gas initiatives. We heard from the draft that was a real concern of communities. Unfortunately, the oil and gas permits can't be included in our standard public participation process, because the way the authorizing legislation from the legislature came, we only have 45 days to review oil and gas permits. So that isn't enough time to do the full public participation process that we do for other permits. So we still wanted to see how we could increase community awareness around the concerns around oil and gas. So this involves having industry groups where there is oil and gas conduct public meetings to inform the public about what is going on in the area around oil and gas in general, as opposed to around a specific permit. Section 5 is about inspection, compliance, and enforcement, and this was an effort to move beyond the permitting process to talk about what we could do around inspections and fines and other efforts within our regulatory authority. Again, we can't go beyond what we're authorized to do, but wanted to make sure that where possible we could prioritize efforts that would benefit environmental justice communities. And then this also calls out community environmental projects, which is a program that we have had for a little while, but wanted to help publicize, where in certain cases with certain types of fines, if there is a facility that has violated their permit, instead of paying the money to DEP, they could invest that money directly in the community affected through things like tree planting or building parks or other things like that, as a way to benefit the community. So we call out that policy. We also updated the policy to include climate initiatives. DEP produces a climate action plan that's updated every 3 years. So wanted to specifically call out looking at environmental justice community concerns in that climate action plan. Also look at climate adaptation and helps get further involvement from EJ communities in our climate initiatives at DEP. Community development and investments is a section that focuses on targeting grants and promoting brownfield development within communities facing environmental justice issues, and partnering with higher education institutions to help leverage benefits to communities facing environmental justice issues. And then the last section, section 8, requires a review of the EJ policy every 4 years, because we don't want to go another 18 years without updating the policy. So we wanted to put in there that the policy should be reviewed for updates at least every 4 years, and also update the way we define environmental justice areas. The way we currently define them is based on 2 demographic factors, based on census data, but a lot more data is more regularly available now. So we're looking at models nationally and from other states that we can use, and we're planning to update that map. We're aiming to have that around the time of the policy's enactment, that we would have the new and updated mapping, and we'd want that mapping updated at least every 2 years based on the latest data. So that's the basics of the policy, but I want to talk a little bit more about tools that are currently available that we're looking to update our mapping with, but that might also help you as the League of Women Voters and other groups you might be affiliated with, help do outreach in environmental justice communities. So one tool that's available now from the Environmental Protection Agency is EJ Screen. And this tool looks at demographic factors and environmental factors nationwide, and you can compare them with a national average and a statewide average based on percentiles. And so that is something, that we're looking at. That's a regularly updated national source that includes, in addition to low income and minority status, which we look at, also includes other demographic factors like linguistic isolation, which can be really helpful in identifying if you want to translate documents or get an interpreter for a meeting, for example. And then also it looks at a variety of environmental indicators related to air quality, wastewater discharges, and a lot of other factors. So we're looking at including some of this data in our updated screening tool as well. And just the goal and the way things are going with these screening tools is trying to get to those drivers of environmental injustice and help to quantify them, and combine pollution burden and pollution vulnerability of communities into a quantifiable and visible number. So California EnviroScreen is a model that we're looking at. They've had a tool since 2010, and they're on version 4.0. Where they combine that pollution burden and population characteristics into a score based on percentiles, and that's definitely a tool we're looking at. And I think there are a lot of interesting things that come from this tool that are really helpful beyond just enforcing a single policy. So, but it also helps show even with all the work we've been doing since the Civil Rights Act, that issues still persist. So this is an example from California where the infilled shaded areas, the more red or orange areas are areas facing more environmental justice concern on Cal Enviro screen. And the outlined areas are areas that are redlined from those maps from the 30s. And you see even, all this time after the Civil Rights Act, that there's still areas that were redlined are often areas still facing environmental justice issues. And that isn't just true in California, that's also true in Pennsylvania. Here's an example from, of two examples from EJ Screen looking at diesel particulate matter in Philadelphia and comparing that to redlined areas, and then proximity to hazardous waste in the city of York and comparing that to redlined areas. And you see that a lot of these issues are very persistent over time. So just to go back to the policy, ways you can help spread the word about it and giving you a timeline for this. We've done a lot of outreach in the past to sort of build on public comment and get more public comment in the drafting of this policy, which is trying to incorporate a lot of that, which we've been doing since fall of 2020, building on some of those comments from the previous policy. We went through and drafted and finalized the policy, got it out for the formal public comment period that we're in, looking to complete that public comment period on May 11th, create a comment response document, make changes to the policy based on that as needed, and then work to get it finalized in late summer, probably more realistically early fall, and start to do training with staff and really roll out the policy in time for it to be enacted in the Wolf administration. So again, just want to call out, if you have comments specifically about the policy, you can either give them in writing or verbally. They both carry equal consideration depending on how you prefer to communicate them. We have 3 virtual public hearings. If you wish to provide verbal comment at the public hearings, you must register 24 hours in advance, just so we have the ability to have timing available, and we'll have interpretation services available as requested for any of those hearings if people want to request them. So that's also something to register for. You can also submit online on our e-comment tool. One of the benefits of the e-comment tool is that everyone can see your comment and you can see other people's comments, so you can sort of build on other people's comments. So that's useful. And that is one point when things come with a form letter, we typically we'll acknowledge that a lot of people are interested in that comment, but it really does get one response. Making a unique comment might be helpful in getting a unique response. And then comments can also be emailed to ecomment@pa.gov, and then you can write and mail them too if you prefer, and there's the address, and all of this is on our website. And we also wanted to provide organizations like the League of Women Voters and others ways to help share information. So we have the website, and on the website we have a share kit that includes graphics and text that you can use for newsletters or email blasts to help spread the word about the virtual public hearings. We'll be doing a session very much like this, though perhaps a little bit shorter and more focused on the policy and a little less on the history, that we're going to record and put on our website. So Monday we'll be doing that informal session that will be something that people can be in point two. And we have a road show. We've scheduled 17 events that other people are hosting where we're participating. And we're, as part of that social media share kit, we're going to be producing a flyer for if there's a community center or someplace to post something visible like a flyer and help get the social media posts out there. So that's it for my portion of the presentation. Here's the contact information, again, based on those regions for the regional coordinators, but I'm happy to take any questions that folks have and try to answer them.
I was going to ask, I noticed that you had a portion on oil and gas industry, but I didn't see anything about solar projects, wind projects, or Bitcoin mining that might possibly, you know.
Yeah, that's a good thing to submit a comment on. I don't think there isn't anything about any of those in there. The issue with Bitcoin mining is often those facilities don't actually require any permits from us. They're they're energy intensive uses, but they can often exist just in a warehouse box, and they don't produce, depending, I guess, on the operation. They don't typically require air permits or things like that.
Diana?
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah,
Sorry.
hi, excuse me. Justin, thank you for your work. Yes, I saw that you added among the trigger permits, oil and gas wells. I was wondering why it wasn't added gas processing facilities. In other words, those that will process gas to make plastics, gasoline, or LNG. And so I was curious as to why those were not in there. And then a related question is, because those require air quality permits, and some of them are highly impactful. And then my other question is, how does a citizen initiate the trigger permit process if it's not one of these specifically listed trigger permits?
Yeah, so I would suggest submitting that comment formally so I can talk to our oil and gas folks. Again, because of that limitation on the oil and gas, they can't be included as a trigger permit, but we did include them as a suggestion for opt-in permits, a strong suggestion for that, as far as certain types of oil and gas permits have that 45-day review, but certain types don't. So that's something that we can look at for an opt-in for those that don't. And the same might apply to some of those other facilities if they have a unique permit type. So I would suggest submitting that.
Thank you. Yeah, I do have that in my drafted remarks thus far. Because so you said statutorily the oil and gas well drilling has to be approved in 45 days. But these big air permits for these gas processing plants, I don't believe they, they just can't get, they do and don't get done in 45 days. So yeah, all right, then I'll throw that in my comments.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I feel like there was a second part to your question that I was going to.
Oh, yeah, sorry. That is, how is there a mechanism by which a citizen can initiate the process? Thank you.
Yes, yeah. So that, so I would say, I guess the policy mostly applies to DEP's actions and activities. So most of the opt-in process is done by is flagged by DEP staff for opting in. But I will say, if you were active with your local legislator, they bring things to our attention all the time. So if you have a concern about a type of facility, talking to your local elected officials about it. That they bring things to our attention all the time, and we're aware that might be a concern. And we can work with them. And then also, you know, I think a lot of times on one of those things that we don't control is land use and getting involved in zoning and that sort of land use aspect. By the time it gets to us for a permit, it's often we have to look at the facility sort of on its own right. So trying to get involved early on if there's types of facilities around like local land use zoning and comprehensive planning is a good way to get it on the radar early on as well. Thanks.
Hey, Justin, this is Melissa from the District Attorney's Office, and I'm calling in, so I can't raise my hand
Okay.
on Zoom. So if it's okay, I'm going to jump in and ask a couple of questions. I know that certainly among some of the communities that I talk to, one of the challenges is education and getting information for their industry regarding what's happening in their industry neighbors. And I'm wondering if in the course of contemplating this update, were there any discussions, or has it come to your attention from any communities about challenges doing file reviews or right to know? I realize COVID has turned that upside down in terms of what traditionally the process folks traditionally undertook for file reviews. But assuming that the process resumes. It struck me that I was just curious if there was any discussion about almost a concierge service or additional support for EJ communities when they are seeking to do a file review or a right to know. I was just curious if anything like that came up. And also, I actually had a bunch of questions, so I'm not going to take all the time. But you mentioned, you did reference compliance, like a special focus on, not compliance, but like inspections, maybe more frequent inspections. You did, I acknowledge, additional focus, I guess, on research. Are those, is it possible or the expectation that there would actually be in these, however it would go, whether it's in the permit or what, but a increased inspection frequency that's designated? I don't know if even DEP has the capacity to up their inspections, or is it an aspiration? And likewise, in terms of is there a target or a goal for research in these EJ areas? Whether it's securing grants to do air quality monitor or whatever the research might be, is there a target as well for research dollars spent in EJ communities, or is that still kind of too early to hammer out?
Yeah. Okay. So, one, as I'm gonna repeat throughout, make sure to write down them in the formal public comment period so that we get responses. But I don't want anyone to be disappointed if they don't see something at the end of this. So I'm making that clear with all of the questions that I answer. But then, okay, so I'm going to take in the file review process, we do have, thousands to millions of documents.
I know.
But we are working actively on digitizing them, starting with more recent files. So we're trying to. I think even before COVID, we were looking to accept documents electronically, which makes them easier to supply electronically. So for more recent permits and documents, we may have that ability depending on the type of permit. And we do try to provide things electronically where we can. And we are going through our, file rooms. Each regional office has been given a sort of industrial scale scanner, and we're trying to work our way through all of those documents, work out the kinks internally. But the end goal of that is to be able to produce all of our documents online, any like protected information being redacted so that people are able to see everything online. But that's a huge job, and I can't say when that will be done, but I will say, that's where the agency is trying to go. And we're in the process of doing that. With that is the stated end goal, to try to eliminate the need for anyone to have to come into the office for a file request at some point. But it's a huge job. As far as additional support, as you see, there's right now 3 of us for the whole state. But we do try to, try to assist where we can with communities facing environmental justice concerns to help ease that process as much as we can. Sometimes, with just the 3 of us and a big workload, sometimes, so we can try to be that concierge service and work people through that process and try to get items internally and sort of push those and get those to communities. But we each cover dozens of counties per person, so that can be a challenge if it happens too much. But we do try to be responsive to requests as far as the concierge service side things for environmental justice communities. As far as the compliance and inspections, I think this policy is a first step, and I think that we hope as we do revisions every 4 years that we help add examples of things that worked and get more specific about the compliance and inspection. We don't have the ability to require additional inspections, but often we the whole agency is understaffed and and has some funding issues. It really, the staffing of the agency has never recovered from the 2009 recession, but where possible, we wanted to target EJ communities where there is additional inspections that can happen. So it is both an aspiration, and we're gonna put more meat on that as we continue to do it and look into individual inspections. And then hopefully, if the budget situation improves and we're able to get additional inspectors, then we're able to do additional, inspections beyond what is mandated by the requirements. We still do some of that today, but the idea is that we would try to do that, and we would help document where we're doing that. And in compliance, sometimes that's very much spelled out by the regulation, but certain types of regulations might have different amounts of leniency written into them, or a mitigating factors aspect that you can make a case for. And we've already started trying to do that with certain permits. So that's the sort of thing we're trying to do and to continue to do as far as the compliance side of things. And as far as the grant funding for communities and targeting a goal, I think we are looking to come up with a grant policy that would go that is looking to focus on environmental justice and wanting to do something Commonwealth-wide about funding for disadvantaged communities. So that might come out in a different policy or set of policies as opposed to being spelled out in this policy. And our hope with that is, that might be Commonwealth-wide as opposed to just DEP.
Very good. Anne has a
Wow,
question, and
thank
you
you.
have one question in the chat. Anne?
Sorry, thank you. Justin, that was really helpful, going over this review. And tomorrow, our league will be having Melissa and Francine Locke, who's the head of our new sustainability, to talk about the new initiatives in Delaware County. So we're excited about that. But you had on one of your slides talking about reinvestment. It looked to me like reinvestment back in the community. If there was an environmental justice project, is there a list of those somewhere? I mean, do we know, for instance, in Delaware County, if that's happened? And with community, you mentioned Circle, which is one of our very activist groups in Chester.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, the Circle from the late 90s, sort of, yeah, they're an active partner for sure, but they sort of got reformed for a while and then reformed it in a new format, which has been great. But the one before this. So our community environmental projects. So those we do have a list. As I said, those have been happening, and they've not really been spelled out in a policy like this before. So unfortunately, with different administrations, there have been different efforts to emphasize this, and so those records aren't always easy to find, unfortunately. But so we don't have a one single sort of quantified list. Different bureaus or programs have different lists of where they've done projects like this. But there have been, I believe there have been some done historically in the city of Chester. It was, but I don't know the details, unfortunately. So, you know, through this process and through advertising these projects, we wanna track them better as well, and work with community groups to help identify projects to get them back in the community more directly.
Okay, thank you. Because Kathy recently joined our league, and we're looking for project ideas. And so if there's something that we could even build on that already occurred or would be a good idea, that would be really helpful. So could we reach out to you to see if there's anything that we can build
Sure,
on?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, I think those projects would have been a while ago, but
Yeah.
so I don't know if there are things that would still be active enough to sort of build on.
Okay.
But typically they go and some of this too, some of our air quality funding, if there are air quality, if someone's in violation and they're fined, some of that goes directly to the municipality if it's a fine over a certain amount. So that's definitely been done in the city of Chester recently, that they've used to work on a trail in Chester Upland Park, but that was not one of those community environmental projects. Those typically go to things like, you know, planting trees, stuff like that.
Thank you.
Jamie Mogul asked, is there consideration of negative environmental impacts in rural communities, many of which are low income? In particular, I'm thinking of pesticide drift, considering the fact that about 75% of all planted acres are in corn and soybeans that are bioengineered to be grown with highly toxic chemical inputs, including rural concerns might help the entire program appeal politically to the entire legislature.
Yeah, so we do like to point out environmental justice is not an urban issue exclusively. Definitely, even with our current identification of areas 30% or more people of color and 20% or more low income, it still reaches a lot of rural communities in Pennsylvania. based on one or both of those factors. So it is, there are very rural communities that are, that meet environmental justice criteria, and we would expect that to also be true as we update the policy. So often those, those are both sort of more farming-based communities, but also communities that are facing economic decline from anthracite coal issues, and then also bituminous coal issues. So we really do reach a lot of rural communities with these policies too.
I was going to ask on page 7 of your policy, you state that an opt-in permit should consider anticipated cumulative impacts to the extent that they can reasonably quantify, but the permit applicant is not required to provide information to the DEP regarding neighboring facilities. Is it the DEP's responsibility to check on the anticipated cumulative impacts, or is there a way for the permitter to look into that to help their cause with the permit?
Yeah, so on cumulative impacts aren't something that we're able to consider in any permit at this point, and that would require legislative action. New Jersey is the first state in the country to actually be able to deny a permit based on cumulative impacts in a law that was from 2020 that their legislature passed. And they're the only state to be able to do that. And that took activist groups working together and working with the legislature to get that passed. I think the issue around cumulative impacts is it's tricky to identify how much would apply to each facility. And that's why almost all of the regulatory authorities that we have are sort of individual facility specific. So again, I will reiterate that comment that you should include that in a formal public comment, but I think overall that's why it's worded that way, to kind of say that we can't really consider neighboring facilities.
Okay. Do we have any more questions? I don't think we do. Justin, this has been
Well,
wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, and it's like right on time. We're like exactly an hour. I'm just going to close again with pointing out that we really do want to get the word out and get comments for this public comment period. So I'm going to point you to this, and I can share a PDF of this with you, Kathy, if you want to
That would be wonderful.
email it out to
I
folks.
appreciate it. very much.
Yeah, we tried to do that share kit to help folks get the word out, and information on our website for registering for the public hearings if you want to do that, or how to submit by in writing.
Excellent. We will share for sure.
Great.
Thank you all for coming
Thanks
tonight.
for
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Justin.
yeah
Thank you,
yeah
Justin.
thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too.
Kathy, quick question.
Sure.
You're going to be sending out the link to this recording, right?
Yes.
I would love to be able to share that to the people who are registered for tomorrow's program, because it fits right into, as a
Right.
follow-up, not tomorrow, but as a follow-up resource for those people that have signed up for our program. Does that make
Absolutely.
sense?